Hey guys, welcome back to Flag Friday. For episode 3 we're doing Ukraine. I've been toying with the idea of making a Ukraine video for a while, but I didn't know if there would be enough history for me to do it. However, upon further investigation, I discovered that there was definitely enough history to make a 5 to 6 minute long video with it, so here we are. To start things off, let's talk about the design of the Ukrainian flag. It's a blue and yellow bicolor flag, with blue on top and yellow on bottom. The symbolism behind these colors? Well, one reason is because the yellow and blue have been the colors of the Ukrainian area for centuries, and the other is because, well, it's what the country looks like. No, really, this is what the country looks like. So, how did this flag come to be? Well, our story starts all the way back in the late 800s in the Kievan Rus, which was a formation of a bunch of Slavic people. The territory of the Kievan Rus included much of where Ukraine currently is today. The Kievan Rus was comprised of multiple principalities who fought each other for control of Kiev. Eventually, the divided Kievan Rus was captured by the Mongols, who took it easily. After this, Ukraine's land fell under the jurisdiction of the state of Galicia-Volhynia, which was a vassal state of the Golden Horde section of the Mongol Empire. It was formed when the principalities of Halyach and Volhynia merged together after the Kievan Rus collapsed. Here was their flag. I don't know if you want to count this as a flag of Ukraine, since it existed hundreds of years before the concept of Ukraine did, but if you wanted to, technically you could. In 1349, Galicia-Volhynia was overtaken by Poland and Lithuania, which eventually merged into the Lithuania-Poland Commonwealth in 1569. Their flag looked like this, maybe. I say maybe because the flag is actually attributed to the Vasa dynasty who ruled over this Commonwealth. As you know if you watched the last episode of Flag Friday, the differentiation between the flags of rulers and dynasties and the country's actual flag is confusing. Either way, the important thing here is that much of Ukraine was in Polish hands inside the Commonwealth. So, the flag of the Kingdom of Poland is probably a better representation of Ukraine. In the 1400s through the 1600s, the Commonwealth began having some trouble from the Crimean Khanate. The Crimean Khanate was a Khanate that was formed when some Golden Horde clans gained some independence from the Mongols and formed their own empire. Obviously, the Khanate was based in Crimea, which at one point was part of Ukraine. So, interestingly, there was a point in history where 3 powerful empires all occupied the lands now known as Ukraine. Okay, so before we continue, we first need to talk about a group known as the Zaporozhian Cossacks. A Cossack is a Slavic Orthodox Christian, and the Zaporozhian Cossacks are Cossacks who lived in the area that is now central and eastern Ukraine. The Zaporozhian Cossack, okay, you know what? I have got to come up with a better name for these guys. The Zaposyks eventually formed a proto-state in eastern Ukraine called the Zaporozhian Sich. It started gaining power, so much so that it began challenging all of its big, powerful neighbors. Eventually, the Zaposyks and Crimean Tatars of the Crimean Khanate had an uprising against the Commonwealth, known as the Khmelnytsky Uprising. They entered Kiev in 1648 and established the Cossack Hetmanate, also known as the Zaporozhian Host. And this is what their flag looked like. Eventually the Zaposyks got beat by the Poles pretty bad at the Battle of Berezhenko, so they made an alliance with Russia. With this alliance, they managed to gain control over most of Ukraine, diminishing the power of the Commonwealth. Some fighting later, the Treaty of Perpetual Peace is signed by Russia and the Commonwealth. This treaty would redraw Europe's borders and would also destroy most of the Cossacks' power. So, this is what Europe looked like in 1689. As you can see, the Commonwealth, the Ottoman Empire, and Russia control most of Ukraine's land. Shortly after this in 1700, the Great Northern War would happen, which was a conflict between Sweden and Russia. The Zaposyks first aligned themselves with Russia, but then switched sides. Russia ended up winning, which was a severe blow to the Zaposyks. Russia even executed almost 900 suspected allies of Ivan Mazepa, the hetman during the war. Later in 1768, the Cossacks had yet another revolution, which ended rather poorly. In 1775, Catherine the Great of Russia officially abolished the Zaporozhian Host, and its lands were fully integrated into Russia. Following this in 1783, Russia annexed Crimea from the Crimean Khanate, which was still just barely around. This was pretty much the end of the Cossacks. So at this point in history, Russia now controls most of Ukraine's land. In the 1800s, Ukrainian nationalism really started to take off, which led to Ukraine taking part in the Spring of Nations. Now, you might be thinking, wait, but the Spring of Nations were revolutions against Austria-Hungary, and Ukraine's land is currently in Russian hands. Well, turns out this region of Europe, called Ukrainian Galicia, is actually what constitutes Ukrainian land. So while most of it is in Russian control, some of it was also in the hands of Austria-Hungary. Anyways, in 1848, the current flag of Ukraine began to be used by the Grand Ruthenian Council. This flag quickly became a popular symbol amongst Ukrainians. Now cut forward a bit to the early 1900s, to the era of the Russian Revolution and World War I. Out of these conflicts, the predecessor to modern Ukraine was formed, the Ukrainian People's Republic. This was formed in 1917. They used a flag of blue and yellow that was either blue-yellow or yellow-blue, but it was most likely blue-yellow, like the current one. In addition to the UPR, there was also the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and the West Ukrainian People's Republic. Poland crushed the WUPR, leaving only the UPR and the USSR. They had a civil war, and the Ukrainian Socialists came out on top. They would eventually go on to become one of the founding members of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So that means that the USSR contained a country that was also known as the USSR before it became integrated. Anyways, the Ukrainian USSR had its own little cachet of unique flags. Here's the flag they used before they called themselves the USSR. They then changed it to this in 1919 after conquering the UPR. It's a red flag with the acronym YCCP in the upper left-hand corner. YCCP stands for the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, but in Russian. This flag would last up until 1929, when it was changed to this, which is the same flag but with a different font. They then changed it again in 1937, this time adding a little hammer and sickle in addition to again altering the font. Finally, in 1949, they just ditched the text and changed it to this. This would remain the Ukrainian flag up until 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. So through all this, something interesting happened to the blue and yellow bicolor flag. It wasn't allowed to be displayed in the Soviet Union due to it being considered anti-Soviet propaganda. It was still sometimes used by those who were against Soviet rule, though. While we're on the subject of that flag, I think it's worth mentioning that it was also the flag of Carpatho-Ukraine, which was a short-lived autonomous region in the Second Czechoslovak Republic. There's also the red and black flag of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, which was a nationalistic Ukrainian paramilitary group that fought against the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Right, so back to the Ukrainian national flag. In the late 80s and 90s, Soviet republics had a surge of nationalism and began bringing back national symbols. Lithuania restored their old flag in 1988, and Latvia and Estonia soon followed. Ukraine's population began feeling the same way, and the flag was heavily used by Ukrainian demonstrators. Finally, on August 24th, 1991, the Ukrainian Declaration of Independence was adopted, and shortly after, on September 4th, the flag would fly over the Ukrainian Parliament building. From September of 1991 to January of 1992, this flag would be used. But it was then changed to the current Ukrainian flag, the one that we've all come to know and love. So there you go, the entire history of Ukraine's flag. I was completely shocked by the fact that Ukraine's flag and lands had so much history behind them. I was woefully mistaken in thinking that there wasn't much to it. If you watched this video expecting me to comment on the current situation in Ukraine, I'm sorry to disappoint. If you want to see a video like that, please let me know. Hopefully you found this video to be entertaining. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video around. Bye!